Back to the big story we've been following tonight. In just a week's time, there were 3 mass shootings across the country. On June 28th, 3 people were killed at the Gilroy Garlic Festival. And then last weekend, 22 people were killed at an El Paso Walmart. Then early the next morning, 9 people were killed outside a bar in Dayton, Ohio. And one thing that many parents are struggling with is how to talk to their kids about these horrific situations.
It is not easy. Joining us now is Dr. Roseann Capanna-Hodge, a pediatric mental health expert. Thank you for being with us, doctor. You help treat kids that have been affected by tragedies like this. You have an office in Newtown, Connecticut. Obviously, that's where Sandy Hook is. And that was the mass shooting that seemed to rock this country to its core. And unfortunately, parents have had to become adept at talking to their kids about this. But it just doesn't seem easy the more mass shootings there are. So what is your advice now after this has become part of our society?
Yeah, no, such great points, Grant. So, this is a conversation parents need to have with their kids, and they really need to think about, when you talk to your kids, you're going to think about what developmental age they're at. Lawrence said he had a 14-year-old. I have a 14-year-old. The conversation you have with a 14-year-old is very different than you have with a 5-year-old. But this is part of our world now, and this is happening all too frequently. And so children know about it, they're hearing about it, they're hearing their parents talking about it, they're listening on the news, their friends are talking about it. I know after the 12-14 tragedy in Sandy Hook, there were stages that happened after the tragedy. And so it didn't matter if it was just in that local community, but I work with people all over the U.S., which, we do in our center. People fly in Ridgefield. And what happens is children show their difficulties in stages. Every kid is different. Some kids have a disposition and a personality that, you kind of go with it. And other kids are more sensitive, right? And they're both wonderful. But the more sensitive child is much more likely to be impacted. And so you might see some sleep difficulties. You might see irritability, mood swings. You might see a variety of things. And it's important for parents to pay attention immediately, but also in the weeks to come. This can go on for months for those people in that exact community.
Dr. Roseann, I know the kids call you Dr. Roseann.
They do. Everybody calls me Dr. Roseann. My mama's called me Dr. Roseann, too.
So, we've been doing stories this week about bulletproof backpacks and even bulletproof hoodies.
I know.
What does that do to a child to send them off to school and tell them that
And they go and do drills.
Have a great day.
They do safety drills at school now. That's part of it. I mean, what can we do? It is part of our culture. So do I recommend that people have bulletproof backpacks? I don't. I think that, children are generally safe. I know that this is something that's happening, but we need to educate our kids about, how to be safe. Also, when they have fears, to talk about it. What does that mean? So when these things happen, parents tend to grill kids. That's not always the best thing to do. What I would like to do, and what I did do when I worked with students from Sandy Hook and other tragedies, is I would say, do you have questions for me? Is there something that comes up? Because what would happen is the kids talk amongst themselves, and then they start, giving information that isn't accurate, and then it sort of spins them. And depending on your child, they may be walking around with false information. I think that's really, really important.
So what you mentioned ages before. When do you start talking to your kids about what's happened, and at what age do you really dive in deep, and at what age do you kind of scratch the surface?
I think that it all depends on your kid, number one. You can have a in general, I think as soon as your kid is starting to go to school, every school system that I know does safety drills. You have to explain what the safety drills are and what they're about and how to be safe in a situation like that. So that's going to start that conversation. And then, depending as, your kid has more of an ability to reflect outside of himself, 9, 10 years old, you start having deeper conversations about it. And it's really about, what are their fears, what are their worries. You don't want to excessively talk about it. You want to give them strategies. You also want to talk about ways to manage stress, and particularly for teenagers, you want to talk about ways to identify other kids that are in crisis and what they should do about it. I think that's really important.
A lot of the teenagers from Sandy Hook, from Parkland, have taken charge themselves. Is this a healthy sign?
Yeah, I mean, have they taken charge themselves in doing
in the
things
sense
in a
that bringing it-
positive?
yes.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the Newtown community, I mean, this is a community that has become so loving and empowered. I mean, you can't walk in the streets without somebody saying good morning to you, which isn't as common in Connecticut as it is here out in San Francisco and in California. So, you know, there always is, I'm always a believer that there's something positive that comes and there's a learning. And these are hard lessons. And I think, you know I put up on the website that...
We have that website, by the way. We can put it on the screen right now. It's drroseann.com.
Yes, thank you, Grant. So that ways
And
to
it's
talk
free.
to your kids. It's free,
Yeah.
and there's ways to talk to your kids about this. And it's not easy. You know, I'm a trained therapist, and I know how to talk to kids, and I do a lot of supporting of parents. But open dialogue, whenever a situation is hard, you know, lots of TLC, be soft about it, and, you know, take care of yourselves, too, as parents, because we don't do that. And that's really,
true.
really important.
Adults suffer as well.
Yeah.
Such good information.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
for
me.
sharing.
She just flew in from the East Coast, so we appreciate
So
you coming right
appreciate
here.
you.
Dr. Roseann.